the Mayor of Washington, D.C. Today we are at the headquarters of the Metropolitan Police Department. I'm joined by Chief Peter Newsham and members of the MPD command staff, as well as other members of our public safety team, including Deputy Mayor Donahue and our DFS Director, Jennifer Smith. Chief Newsham is going to provide a detailed update of where we are in the investigations of several tragic and violent events over this weekend. We are all pleased that MPD worked closely with the community and made an arrest in the murder of 11-year-old Karan Brown. Our thoughts and prayers go out to Karan's family and all of the communities of friends and loved ones who mourn his loss. All loss of life, all tragic killings are mourned by people in Washington, D.C., and we pray for all the victims and their families today. We know, however, that thoughts and prayers won't bring Karan back or any of the people who have been victims. We also know that guns are killing people in the districts, and guns in the hands of wrong people are making our entire community safe. As I have said throughout this weekend, there's a lot that we can do in the government, and there's a lot more that we can do with the community's help. We need you to help us make our neighborhood safe by letting us know about illegal guns, letting us know about people that you know are prepared to use them, have access to them, and may need the critical help of the government. Let us know before they kill somebody. Let us know before they ruin their own lives by committing this tragic homicide. Time and time again, unfortunately, we have seen people who are willing, who demonstrate, and who have histories of a callous disregard for human life and for a willingness to snatch the innocent of childhood from our kids and from our communities. The police are taking information, and you may provide that information anonymously by texting 50411, 50411, or calling the anonymous tips line at 202-727-9099. Again, Chief Newsham will provide investigatory updates, and we'll take questions then.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. To reiterate what our mayor just said, it's important that we come together today to ensure our community that we will not deter from our goal of removing these illegal firearms from our streets. This past weekend, there have been several incidents that have claimed the lives and fractured families, and we must ensure everyone in the district that steps are being taken to address this violence by MPD, our partners, and other district and federal government agencies. I would like to call on each household in our community, in our city, to help us get these illegal firearms off our streets and out of the hands of anyone with the potential of committing a senseless crime and creating another one of these tragedies like the mayor said. We experienced several homicides since this past Thursday, and I want the public to know that we're working diligently to close those cases. As you know, we did close the tragic shooting death of a little boy by the name of Karan Brown, just 11-year-old. I said this on Saturday night when we announced the closure. Some adult felt like it was okay to discharge a firearm in our community. And a family and an 11-year-old boy has lost their life as a result. Other homicide cases that we've had this past weekend, just equally as tragic to the families. On Friday, July 19th, at about 5:49 p.m., members of the 5th District responded to a residence in the 1000 block of Queen Street Northeast for the report of 2 unconscious males. When they arrived, they located an adult male and a juvenile male who was 17 years of age. Both were unconscious and unresponsive, and they were both suffering from gunshot wounds. DC Fire and Emergency Medical Services responded to the scene and found that the victims displayed no signs consistent with life. Both victims remained on the scene until they were transported to the office of the Chief Medical Examiner. The decedents were identified as 17-year-old Aki Washington Scruggs and 57-year-old Hugh Washington, both from Northeast Washington, D.C. They were father and son. At this time, the incident does not appear to be domestic in nature, and we are trying to identify the folks that are responsible. Early Sunday morning at about 2:42 a.m., members of the 3rd District responded to the 1100 block of U Street Northwest for the report of a shooting. Upon arrival, members located an adult male victim in the roadway suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. DC Fire and Emergency Medical Services responded to the scene. They transported the victim to a local hospital for treatment. After all life-saving efforts failed, the victim was pronounced dead by medical staff. The decedent has been identified as 34-year-old Eric Bird of Southeast D.C. Additionally, early Saturday morning at about 3:47 a.m., members of the 7th District responded to the 3000 block of 30th Street Southeast for the report of a shooting. Upon arrival, members located an adult male victim unconscious, unresponsive, and suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. DC Fire and Emergency Medical Services responded to the scene. They transported the victim to a local hospital, and after all life-saving efforts failed, the victim was pronounced dead. The decedent has been identified as 23-year-old Delwan Lyons of Southeast D.C. On Saturday, July 20th, at about 10:25 p.m., members of the 3rd District were dispatched to the 2600 block of Sherman Avenue Northwest for the sound of gunshots. Arriving officers were notified that a victim had shown up at a local hospital suffering from multiple gunshot wounds to the body and was admitted in grave condition. Last night, members of that victim was subsequently pronounced dead. We are not releasing the name in that case until we have an opportunity to notify the next of kin. Last night at 7:41 p.m., members of the 7th District responded to the 1300 block of Congress Street Southeast for the sound of gunshots. When they arrived, they located an adult male victim in the alley, unconscious and unresponsive, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. DC Fire and Emergency Medical Services responded to the scene, transported the victim to a local hospital. Life-saving efforts failed, and the victim was pronounced dead. That decedent has been identified as 27-year-old Jamal Bandy of no fixed address. I want to extend my condolences to all of the families that have lost a loved one tragically to gun violence in our city. No one deserves to die from gun violence. We're calling on the public's assistance to help us find these individuals, and as the mayor noted, you can give information anonymously by texting us on 50411 or calling us on 202-727-9099. We can take any questions that you all might have.
Yesterday, the unidentified person?
Yes, it was pronounced, yes, yesterday.
What else can you tell us about the moments leading up to the murder of Teron Brown? I mean, my understanding it was just incredibly senseless and stupid and evil, really. What else can you tell us about what?
Not a lot right now. I mean, you've seen the court documents, I'm assuming, or you will see them, or you have, and you'll see them later today, which will give you some detail about the probable cause that we were established to take this suspect into custody. We are still working through an exact motive in the case. It's unclear whether or not the 11-year-old was the intended target. As I said yesterday, it's unimaginable that an 11-year-old would ever be an intended target, but we have not ruled that out at this point.
And can you tell us anything about this scuffle or fight or whatever that happened near the McDonald's?
I don't want to say anything at this point that might jeopardize the investigation, but there will be some additional details available in the court documents.
Gee, that's, by my count, 7 homicides in 4 days, which is, harkens back to.
I think it's. Are you including the little boy on Thursday?
Yeah, Thursday to Sunday, which sort of reminds people who were around here 25 years ago what those days were like. Do you recall that many homicides in such a short span since the dark days of crack and?
I think in recent memory I don't. So this is particularly disturbing to have this many homicides over the course of a weekend.
What do you attribute this outburst to?
It's very
Anything to do with the weather?
It's very simple. I mean, you can look at the cases where we're making arrests. In almost every one of the cases, or a large majority of the cases, you have suspects that are involved in the criminal justice system pretty intensely. They have been arrested, many of them at least to the tune of about 50% with an illegal firearm prior to the murder. I want to say close to a little over 20% of the suspects that we arrest for homicide are felons in possession of a firearm. These cases since last Thursday have involved illegal firearms and discharging them in our city. I think collectively we got to get a little bit more serious about how we're handling gun crime in our city. I mean, it's no surprise to us when we arrest a suspect for homicide in our city and we see that person has been arrested with a firearm before. So I would say collectively we need to do a better job as a criminal justice system in holding those folks accountable the first time. Once somebody is killed, they're dead forever. And we have a responsibility. And when I say we as the police and all of our criminal justice partners, to ensure that does not happen. And I feel at this point the consequences for illegal firearm possession in our city are not changing behavior. Yes, Lou.
Chief, about this issue of trying to step up efforts to have the public and the community come forward to help you apprehend people or capture firearms that people have. Could you say a little bit about how the whatever programs you have are in place to protect either the confidentiality or the safety of a community person who might be scared to come forward?
Yeah, that's why we offer the opportunity to give information anonymously. If you give us information anonymously, we will not divulge who you are. That's one of the ways we try to keep folks safe. If somebody, we do have witness protection. If somebody's willing to come out and make themselves known, so we can relocate them to ensure that they're safe if they do give information. You know, we talk about community involvement, and it wasn't more clear than in the case of Quran. We had a number of folks that were willing to give information about this little boy that was murdered in our street. It shouldn't take the death of an 11-year-old for people to come forward. Every single time that somebody dies in our city, people should come forward with that same passion to ensure that the folks that are responsible are held accountable. I can say with certainty there are folks in our community who have seen folks, young men carrying illegal firearms and have not notified the police. And until we decide as a community that we're going to call every single time, we're going to continue to have this gun violence. Go ahead, Sam.
Yes, Chief, so you said basically you got a lot of community cooperation in the case of Quran Brown.
And I don't want to say that we haven't had cooperation in some of the other cases, because we have, and we have made some pretty good progress in at least a couple of them. But I do want to urge folks, you know, if you did see something or you do see something or you hear something, you got to give us a call and let us know. This is a collective effort to ensure that we close these cases. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So, a couple of things. It was extremely hot last week. Is there some relationship there, or do you all think about that? Is there some relationship between?
You know, whenever something happens, we think about any factor that could contribute to that. I don't know if we can say that heat contributed to the the murders in any of these cases. I can tell you 100% with 100% certainty what did contribute. It was illegal firearms.
In your program here, Got Guns, how does that work?
If you have information about a gun, you can call us or text us anonymously, and we can make sure that you will actually get paid. If we go out and we recover that gun, you can get paid, and we will give you a number, and you can pick up the money anonymously. So that's a great program. It's been very successful to us.
The suspect in Quran's murder, I might be wrong about this because I haven't looked hard enough yet, but he doesn't seem to fit the profile that you outlined a few moments ago, someone deeply involved in the justice system. Did you have any contact with him? Has he had any involvement in the system at all prior to this?
He has a criminal history, I will say that.
Is it locally or somewhere else?
He has a criminal history. So that's the best detail I can give you on that. Yes.
Alana Wise, WAMU. I'm curious whether or not the suspicion is that we've mentioned that there's this spike in homicides, and I'm curious whether or not the suspicion is that there's actually an increase in the number of illegal guns in the streets, and if so, where do we suspect they're coming from?
It certainly seems that way if you talk to our police officers out on the street. That does seem to be a proliferation of guns out there, and we are seizing more guns this year than we did last year. So all of those are indicators that there seems to be more guns out in our community. Most of the guns that we recover in the District of Columbia come from the state of Virginia and the state of Maryland. Those two numbers have actually flopped over the years. In the past, Maryland used to be a bigger contributor to firearms in our city than they are now. That has actually reduced. I believe that's because of some of the laws that they have instituted in the state of Maryland around firearms. I know the General Assembly in Virginia is getting ready to meet in the fall, and we're very hopeful that they will agree to have some firearms laws out in Virginia that will stop some of the flow of the guns into the District of Columbia.
And what are police doing to increase the level of community trust to ensure that when these sorts of incidents happen, people in the community are willing to come forward and discuss with law enforcement?
That is a day-to-day, 24-hour day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year effort, and it's building relationship with folks. Everything we do in the community, the things that we do in the schools, our Beat the Streets initiatives, the things that we do at our youth division, the things that we do with our seniors, every single thing that we do, and anyone who follows us on Twitter can see the things that we are doing on a daily basis to build relationships with the folks. I think that's why we are as successful as we are in closing cases. But I always hearken back to my concern that you would have to arrest somebody twice for a firearm. I think if you arrest them the first time, there should be consequences that make that person decide that they're not going to pick up a gun again, and I don't think we have that right now.
Chief, can I follow up on that train of thought there? Is it that the current laws on the books, the penalties that are currently on the books that the D.C. Council and Mayor could affect are not sufficient enough, or is it that your U.S. attorney partners are not prosecuting to the extent that you would like to see?
I'm not going to point the finger at any one of my criminal justice partners, but I can say that I live here in the District of Columbia. I'm not comfortable with the consequences that are being metered out for possession of illegal firearm in our city. And as the chief of police, I'm convinced that's not changing behavior.
Does that mean you're calling for tougher penalties here in D.C. from a legal perspective?
I think that we all need to take a look. The Criminal Justice Coordinating Council meets on a monthly basis. I have had this conversation with them on multiple occasions. I think all of us need to take a look to see what we need to do to ensure that we have better consequences. That on our side, that when we do bring a case into the criminal justice system, that it's a solid case, that the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecutes the cases, that when someone is convicted, that our juries, when they have sufficient evidence that they do convict, that when they are convicted, that the penalties that are on the books are metered out in a way to change behavior, and right now that's not happening.
Could I ask you about two other tools that might be at your disposal? Can you talk a little bit about surveillance cameras and how you're using those, and if they played any role in any of these cases? And also, and I'm not completely up to speed where we are with the red flag laws in D.C., but is that a tool as well at your disposal?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the red flag laws, but I will talk about the video cameras. We have a program here, thanks to the mayor in the District of Columbia, where you can get rebate at your business or at your home if you get a video surveillance camera. One of the reasons that we were able to close the case of the 11-year-old Karan was due to video. And that video, in my opinion, and we just were up in the crime briefing, the mayor came to our crime briefing, and she saw the value in the video that we get, not just in our homicides, but in the daily crimes that occur across the city. It's an invaluable tool. If people don't take advantage of it, they should. And you know, particularly when it's free, I wouldn't understand why somebody wouldn't do it.
I understand that you went out and talked to Karan's mother. I don't know if you want to talk specifically about that conversation, but can you tell us what it was like to have to go talk to her mom and tell her about this?
I spoke with Karan's mom over the phone on Friday, and it is, as you can imagine, heart-wrenching. You can also imagine a mom in total shock. And not only will she and her family need support in these immediate days, but she will need support ongoing, as will his siblings.
Mayor, is the city paying for his funeral and repast?
We will be able to tap into the Crime Victims Fund. Yes.
Mayor,
Yes.
Chief, I'm not sure why you won't talk about red flag laws, but can you talk about that? And Chief, can you tell us why you won't? I mean, I don't.
What's your question?
Well, are you availing yourselves of red flag laws? Do we have?
I think we have something circulating at the council. Let me double check on that, Mark.
That you support? Is that something the chief would support? I mean, we see what's going, how they're using it in Montgomery County, for instance, have been very vocal about how it's helped them there.
Well, I think you know how I feel about guns. And I've sometimes been criticized in the community for going too far in suggesting how we strengthen our laws to go get guns, be able to target people who we know have guns and will use guns, and it's illegal for them to have guns, and making sure that everybody in the system is doing their part to enforce the law. So I think while we have the very important discussion about how we get to people before they commit crimes, offer them services, violence interruption, intensive job training, we have to know that nobody wants to live in a neighborhood where they're scared of hearing gunfire or they can't send their child, an 11-year-old, to the McDonald's. Okay, that's not how we should be living. That's not normal. And we have to put the people who are following the law first and put a priority on their safety. Yes.
Mayor, you mentioned violence interrupters, and I know one thing I've heard from the community is that there's been some concern / criticism about a lack of funding for certain tenets of the NEAR Act. Do incidents like what we've seen over the weekend, the spike in violence, increase the motivation for council to put forward the tools necessary to fully carry out the NEAR Act?
Well, I think if anybody thought that more money for the violence interruption would have stopped this crazed individual for shooting at a child, then the answer would be yes.
Well, obviously not necessarily specifically,
or anything specifically. So that's what I'm saying. We have been very invested in violence interruption strategies, incredible messenger strategies throughout my tenure. And so there isn't one bucket of investments that we will make. Law enforcement, there are multiple buckets, including interruption, and more importantly, how do we get people connected to jobs? So the other, the chief mentioned that the illegal guns are at the root of all these cases, but I also see something else, and it's desperation. And so how are we reaching out to families if they know that they have a desperate case of a brother, an uncle, a son who is on the verge of violence? What do we do? And so that's part of what we're talking about today. What do we do with that individual who is on the verge, has a gun, and can hurt somebody?
If there is a family member who knows that and is concerned about that and knows this person has a gun, but is worried that their loved one would be arrested.
It's better to be arrested for having a gun than for murdering a child. Call us. Yes.
Mayor, can I ask about something else?
Yes.
Okay. I understand that Howard, and maybe this is for the police, but that Howard University has had a complaint about Howard students threatening the university and that the police are investigating. Can anybody tell us about that?
I'm not aware of that, Chief.
You're not
We don't
aware
have
of
any
it?
information on that right now, Sam. Yeah.
Chief Dean is here. Chief, could you update us on heat-related calls for service over the weekend and how your department handled all that? I believe you had a couple firefighters that actually dealt with the heat.
So we had about 135 heat-related calls over the weekend. We had 2 firefighters that were impacted by a fire that happened Saturday evening. One went for heat exhaustion. The other one took some smoke, and he was sent to the hospital, stayed overnight. Actually, he's still there.
And can you update us on his condition? Why is he still?
So they found some soot when they were looking down his throat, so they intubated him to make sure that they protected his airway. That way, if he had swelling, they wouldn't have to try to get in there. So that they intubated him. I believe they pulled the tube on yesterday, and he spent the night. He's eating food right now. He'll probably get out either today or tomorrow.
Chief, while I have you there, can I ask you about your 2 firefighters who were arrested at a pizza shop in an altercation with several D.C. police officers? From everything we heard, the D.C. police officers did everything they could to de-escalate that situation.
So those 2 members do not represent the views of the men and women of the D.C. Fire and EMS Department. We work very collaboratively with our public safety partners. They're responsible for their words and their actions. They've been pulled from operations, and they're currently in an administrative spot until we finish our investigation of them.
These are not the first firefighters from that very fire station who have made derogatory or threatening comments about D.C. police officers.
So again, they still do not represent the views of the men and women of the D.C. Fire and EMS. We have a great relationship with our public safety partners, and we'll continue to do that.
Yes, for Chief Newsham or the mayor, I was just wondering if you could give a little bit of an update on some of those that we know of, at least 4 or 5 unsolved assaults and attacks against members of the LGBT community here in the city in the last 2 months. The most serious ones were the 2 murders of the transgender women in PG County, but the ones in D.C., fortunately, were not fatal, but a few of them were serious.
Right, and so we, as you know, Lou, we take that very seriously. Special Liaison Unit has been in contact with all the victims in those cases. I don't have any significant progress to report. We have been keeping in close contact with Prince George's County. We've offered them our services of our Special Liaison Unit if they want to take advantage of that, because we do have such a great relationship with the LGBT community here in Washington, D.C. But as we have updates, I can provide them to you and make sure that you get them.
On the shooting in Brentwood, it wasn't a fatal shooting, but I think there were 4 people shot near the rec center. Is that right?
There were. So the rec center was closed. It was a Sunday. It was in the evening, and we had somebody that came up and opened fire on a group of folks that were hanging out in front of the rec center. We had 4 individuals that were struck. None of them were life-threatening. Brentwood Rec.
May I add to that, Chief?
Yes, ma'am.
I have also, and I'm going to be directing several of our other agencies. To me, this is not a law enforcement view. It's my own view. It's a classic case of what we've been talking about. We have 4 young people shot at, and they are, in my view, in danger of being shot at again or doing some shooting. Okay, and so we have asked for them to be targeted for intensive services. And if they are willing, we think that we can get them out of the cycle of violence that they are involved in. And so just to kind of make an example of how all of our services can work together, law enforcement, violence interruption, and intensive services, we may be able to break the cycle. And if we can't, we may be having to see them in another case or someplace else along the line. So we want to stop it now because this time their injuries weren't severe.
Thank you, everyone.